Here we go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of DC Movie Mondays with Kelsey and Dill. Here recapping a trilogy that a lot of people have been asking for, since we started the show 2 years ago, have been asking for this episode because it's probably one of the most popular DC things out there of all time, and it is the Dark Knight Trilogy. And we figured with Christopher Nolan finally winning his Best Director Oscar and winning Best Picture, we were like, finally, we can now devote something to this trilogy because we've never actually talked about it here on the show. How you doing, Kels? How's it going?
I'm doing so good, Dill. I had a early Easter dinner with the fam because I have work on Easter, unfortunately. So I'm a few glasses of wine in. So I'm
Cool.
excited to talk about the Dark Knight trilogy with you.
Yeah. But before we get to that, we always, share if we, have any news of the week. Did you have any DC news? I know, there's been a lot of, hype building up for Superman Legacy, but do you have any news pertaining to anything DC related?
Yes, I do
Oh,
actually. So
okay.
it was confirmed recently by the Hollywood Reporter
Mhm.
that they found their Supergirl to
Yes.
play in James Gunn's DC movies. She's going to be played by Millie
Cool.
Alcock, who doesn't have a ton under her belt. She's an
Okay.
Australian actress, so she's fairly new to the scene, but she has a really cute look about her, and
Yeah.
she's most well known right now, I guess, for playing a role in House of the Dragon
Yeah.
or
So
House of
she's like,
Dragons.
yeah, she's like the lead of the spin-off of Game of Thrones, which I never actually finished.
Yeah,
I made it 2 episodes and then I just never picked it back up, even though it was good. But she was very good, and I like how they're going really young with this cast. It seems like they want to kind
yeah,
of, make them young so they can build upon this universe. Because I think James Gunn has a lot of actual promise and potential with this franchise, and he doesn't want to start them old because the older they get, yeah, then it becomes harder to use them, especially for action. But very, very
exactly.
cool.
Yeah.
My news actually has to do with Supergirl, but more so the TV show Supergirl. The writer just got attached to make a Teen Titans live action feature for DC Studios, which
Oh,
is cool. So
wow.
yeah, so we obviously cover the whole series here on this show, but yeah, they're making a live action adaptation of Teen Titans, which is gonna be really cool. Again, it's cool that they're probably gonna have a young cast too. I think this is just a cool way to have some of these up and comer actors to come in for it,
Yeah.
but it's very early. This was on Variety 2 weeks ago. So yeah, Teen Titans is coming. I forget the name of the. I had the name of the. Oh, here we go. Anna Nogueira, who penned the
Mm.
Supergirl. She's writing the Supergirl movie. That's what it is. The Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow that is happening with Sasha Calle. So that's really cool. And I'm really excited to see her pen that because I think Teen Titans is the one thing we really haven't gotten from animated to live action. Obviously, we've seen so many live action iterations of Batman that a lot of people love the animated of that, but
Yeah.
Teen Titans has only been animated, so it's going to be cool to kind of see that in a live action setting. And who knows if it's going to be good, but I'm excited for it anyway. Yeah. Any
That's super
last thoughts?
exciting. I love the Teen Titans animated show.
Yeah.
So that's going to be really awesome to come to life. I hope they nail it better than the reviews I've been seeing about the live action version of Avatar: The Last Airbender that just hit Netflix.
Right.
I haven't heard too many great things about that show just because
Yeah.
they've strayed from the perfect writing that was
Mm,
that show, and they've
yeah.
kind of interpreted it in ways that audiences haven't necessarily loved, so I'm hoping, better for the Teen Titans live action.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, when something so precious as this animated show that was really good, Teen Titans was a hit. So it's
Mhm,
like one of those things
mhm.
where the more precious the source material is, the harder it is to adapt. We see that over at Disney with all the live action remakes. It's like the
Yeah,
ones that are better, are the ones that don't have the stakes. Like Pete's Dragon is my favorite because I have no stock in the original Pete's Dragon. The ones I hate, The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, all the ones that I feel like don't need to be touched, that get touched
yeah.
and ruined. The Lion King especially. So I'm really hoping that it'll be good. The Teen Titans. Any other DC news, Kels?
That's it for me.
Cool.
Uh
What was the best thing you watched this week, Kels?
Oh, Dill, I'm
Aside from this
inclined
trilogy, but, because it's weird.
I'm inclined to say, like, this trilogy. Actually, Dill, I've been, kinda taking a break from movies this past week. I actually got out and I saw 2 shows, Broadway shows or, an off-Broadway and a Broadway, show this past week. I saw The Notebook on Broadway, which is,
Okay.
oh, so, so sad. Oh my
Was it
god. It
good?
was like this it was so yeah, it was so good. The music was beautiful, like, everyone had such an amazing voice, like, when the ensemble were all singing together, it was, like, otherworldly, like, it sounded like a recording, like, I was like,
Well,
"There's
that's
no
great.
way this can
Yeah.
be live."
That's great because, the only 2 people I know from, like, the Notebook production are the 2
Yeah.
music directors. It's Alex Golden and Jeff Coe, like, I'm friends with both of them, so I'm like, "Oh, that's so
Yeah.
exciting hearing that the music is
No.
good because I know both of them, so.
Yeah, I saw it with our friend, Alex Frisch, who
Oh,
also
who
knows
knows
Jeff
Jeff?
Coe because they went to high school together. And we were both just like, "Wow, Jeff Coe, you did an amazing job with this
So
music." It was
Jeff was
so,
there
so
that
good.
night you went? Oh, that's so
Yes,
cool.
he was in
Wow.
the pit. He was, conducting, so
Jeff,
we
if you're
saw, like
listening,
yeah,
thank
we
you.
saw him up
Yeah,
there. No,
cool.
he did an outstanding job. It was really,
Yeah.
really incredible.
What else did you see,
And
Kels?
and then I also saw Teeth, an off-Broadway musical at Playwrights Horizons, which is
Hmm.
a musical adaptation of the horror movie Teeth, which is about yes. Okay, your face is telling me that you know what Teeth is about.
Oh, I know, and I love it because it's one of those it's one of
And
those
yeah,
films that had such a taboo. Before Kelsey tells everyone what Teeth is about, had such a
yeah,
taboo that you went to watch it as a joke, and you're like, wait, this actually has something to say about women and like you know their puberty and their process and sexual
yeah,
assault that is actually kind of poignant, even though it's very schlocky B movie shit. What is Teeth
yeah.
about, Kels?
So Teeth is about a young woman who comes from a very, very religious background, who just so happens to have teeth in her nether regions. And so it's kind of this journey she goes on with exploring her sexuality, but then having a deadly weapon
Mhm.
embedded in her and how she kind of deals with that. And it was
Yeah.
very, very funny. The cast did such a good job. Everyone was so talented. Um the set really blew me away because you don't go into like you go to an off-Broadway theater and like you're not expecting like anything crazy, but like what they were able to accomplish with what they had was incredible. Like sets just start falling down, there's
Hmm.
fire, like it's very reminiscent of like Carrie in a
Okay.
sense where it's like shit just starts going, haywire. And yeah, it was very, very fun. I'm very glad I got to see it.
Nice.
So if you're
I should
in
check it out. Yeah.
they
Yeah.
keep extending the run because it's so
I didn't
popular.
even know that was a
So
thing. I feel
no,
so
yeah,
out of the loop on that because I've been
it
living in Jersey for a while, so I
yeah,
moved back to the city this week. I'm actually back home now because of Easter, but like I
yeah,
need to catch up on so much because I feel like by the time I left and came back, there were like 20 new Broadway shows, 20 new off
yeah.
Broadway shows. I'm like, how am I gonna supposed to see The Notebook, The Outsiders, all these shows, The Wiz, Tommy, like all these shows that are all opening this
Mhm.
week because they're all trying to get in for the Tony deadline, which is next month. Actually,
Right.
Chad and I are buying tickets for Illinois this week because that just got announced that they're bringing that to Broadway, which is cool because he's a big Soup
Cool, cool,
Seasons fan.
cool.
Yeah, the best thing I watched this week, I don't know if you've seen it yet, Kels, but Love Lies Bleeding, starring Kristen Stewart.
I haven't, but I've heard great things.
Did I think I texted you, right? Did
Yes.
I text you?
Yes, you did.
I didn't I expected to like it, but I left it being like this is like this generation's Bound. And for those who don't know Bound because it's a small film, that's the Wachowskis' first film, the Wachowski sisters who did The Matrix. They did this
Mm,
really kind of like sexy, sultry, like lesbian thriller, crime thriller where it's like all about like them trying to hide this murder and this movie felt
mm,
like that. It's about two lovers who are trying to hide a murder, but one's addicted to steroids because she's a bodybuilder, and the other one is involved in a crime family.
mm,
It's so interesting and it's so good, and I think it's one of those movies that is going to be kind of like a modern cult classic. Not because it's bad,
mm,
because usually we think cult classic is bad, but more so because I don't think it's being as seen. But I think in like 10 years, kind of like Jennifer's Body, it's going to have a big following in like 10 years.
mm.
And I can't wait to be on the side of history that said, "Oh, I saw it when, and I loved it when." So if you have a chance to go see that, see it. It's awesome, and also a good feminist piece, good girl power piece, which I love to see.
Cool,
So
cool, cool.
yeah,
I love it. I'm
cool.
definitely gonna, you know, get myself out there and see it for sure
Yeah.
because everyone says
Um,
it's been great.
Yeah, I need to do the horror double feature of Immaculate and the Devil. What is it? Late Night with the Devil, because those two movies both
Yeah.
came out last week, and they're both horror movies. I was told to double feature them, so I'm going to do that as well. Hopefully next week.
Okay.
But we are here to talk about the Dark Knight trilogy, the most anticipated video probably ever for this podcast, because everyone literally is like, when are you doing Dark Knight? When are you doing Dark Knight? And we are finally doing it. And we're not just doing Dark Knight, we're doing the trilogy, because I think it's important that I know the one film gets singled out, but I do think the first and third do add a lot to that second film, and just looking at the trilogy as a whole, especially seeing where Christopher Nolan has come. I mean, he kind of got into this franchise having only done Memento, Insomnia, and Following. He had only 3 films under his belt, so he was still an up-and-comer. He wasn't a household name. And then Batman Begins happened, he still wasn't a household name because it was one film, but then it wasn't until The Dark Knight happened where people are like, you got to watch this guy, Christopher Nolan. You got to keep your eyes on him. And then that's when we got Inception and Interstellar and Dunkirk and, of course, Dark Knight Rises, but that's when he became the celebrity director. And we very rarely see celebrity directors. Usually it's actors. He's one of the rare few that, like, common people know him as a celebrity and he's a director. It's like him, Spielberg, Scorsese. There's only a few really that are Greta Gerwig now, Jordan Peele, who are like celebrities for directing, which I like to see. I like how that's becoming more of a trend, because those are the people really who are making this work happen. You know, the actors are as well. We are both actors. We know how much, you know, you put into it, but I mean, the directors are really the ones steering the ship. So I'm really excited to talk about this, especially in the wake of Oppenheimer. I mean, Chad and I just did our picture. This episode was 5 hours long this past weekend, talking about all 10 Best Picture nominees, and we had a 40-minute discussion on Oppenheimer. So I'm very excited for people to watch that. That just dropped on Saturday, so go check that out. Put it at two times speed, and it'll only go by it at 2.5 hours. But yeah, it's really cool to see Christopher Nolan now and watch this with that context, because I haven't watched that. I haven't watched this trilogy since the, you know, Oppenheimer, Dunkirk, and Interstellar splash of his career. But what were your thoughts on this trilogy as a whole, I guess? Because you had seen Dark Knight, right? But you hadn't seen the others, or had you seen them all? Okay.
So I seen Dark Knight because we watched that in acting class in high school, and so I really only remembered what Heath Ledger did in The Dark Knight, but, like, honestly, that's all you need to know about The Dark Knight, is because everything he does is just incredible in that film. No, not to knock the rest of the movie, but I'm just saying, if you're gonna walk away from that movie remembering anything, like, remember 100%. His performance.
I think it's the best performance ever given by any actor ever. Like, I really do think it might be the best performance ever.
100%. And so the other 2 were brand new to me, and I'm so glad, Dale, that you just went off on like a very loving tangent about Christopher Nolan, because I was watching these movies and, like, I literally said it just, like, out loud to myself. I was like, this Christopher Nolan guy, he might be onto something. Like, these are really great movies. I had a really good time with all 3 of them. I'm not gonna lie. I mean,
the public. Yeah, I was gonna say, before you get into which one you like the most, like, the public reception is that people really like the first one, but it wasn't really like a smash hit like Dark Knight was. Dark Knight was the one that everyone was like, this could be the best film of all time. It was such an impactful film that the Oscars extended their nominees from 5 to 10 because Dark Knight got snubbed for an Oscar. It was that impactful. And then the sequel, because Dark Knight was such a hit, the sequel didn't get the most positive reception because it was following The Dark Knight, but I think with time people have come around to appreciate it a little bit more. But it generally goes, the public perception is that Dark Knight's the crown jewel, and then Batman Begins, and then Dark Knight Rises is not necessarily everyone's favorite. But I do agree. I like all 3 of these to varying extents, to a very full extent. I think all 3 are great.
And honestly, like, this was as embarrassing as it is to admit, this was kind of really my introduction to, like, the Batman storyline. Like, I know, like, obviously of him, but, like, you know, to know the depths of, like, his character and his kind of upbringing and his origin, like, I was really kind of clueless. And honestly, like, watching Christian Bale be Batman, it makes me not want to watch any other version of Batman ever, because I'm like, no other performance is going to be this. Like, he's just so talented as a whole that, like, this Batman and this superhero, all 3 of these superhero films just feel so grounded and real and high stakes, and it's like nothing is, like, gimmicky or corny or like even camp, you know, like everything from his, like, gadgets to the Batmobile to the costuming, like, it's all, like, so real. And I think that's what I appreciated most about these films, is that they were really just committing to the bit, like, so hardcore that you're just they start, and you believe them from beginning to end. You know what
Well,
I
and
mean?
it's interesting because he has a tough task, all Batmen do, really, of
Mhm.
playing two characters because you have to play Bruce and Batman, and they're very different. And I think the first film
Mhm.
is where they're the closest, but then by the third film, they're so different. But they are also the same, but they are so different in just the
Right.
mannerisms, the voice. The voice from the first film to the second film is a big 180. But I think
Mhm.
it works. It gets really low, but I think that's important.
Yeah.
And that's what we talked about with the new Batman. It was like, Robert Pattinson, it was a lot of him doing everything as the Batman. It was a lot less Bruce Wayne. Whereas here, I think we get a lot of an even balance of Bruce Wayne and Batman. And it's different
Yes.
than like, there's obviously our favorite, we talk about her on the podcast a lot, but Harley Quinn, it's like, the Harley Quinn doesn't have an alter ego. She's Harley
No,
Quinn. So it's like, we
it's
don't get that
yeah.
with her. Whereas like with Batman, with Superman, what we talked about with Christopher Reeve, like it's like, you're getting the person like Clark Kent or Bruce Wayne, and then you're getting Superman or Batman. And I think this one especially, you're really able to see that divide. And I think the most important parts of the films are those personal Bruce Wayne moments, or not the Batman moments. It's the moments
Yeah.
where he wants to act out, he wants to be vengeful, he wants to get revenge, but he can't because he stands for something greater as the Batman. The Batman doesn't kill, or he's not supposed to.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it's interesting to see Harvey Dent in the second one, not to get too far ahead, and see
Yeah.
him as kind of also this not Bruce Wayne figure, even more so White Knight. The whole Dark Knight title, some people think it's about Harvey Dent, not Bruce Wayne, because Harvey Dent was the White Knight
Mm.
who turned dark, and kind of like
Mm.
seeing these two different guys who are kind of in a similar boat, but one kind of descends into madness and violence, and the other still has to stand for something better, which is what Batman is. But let's
Yeah.
start with Batman Begins. Yeah. But you finished your
Absolutely,
thought.
but,
Yeah.
you brought up Robert Pattinson, so I just wanted to say this real quick. I think it was at some point, maybe in The Dark Knight, that I noticed that because I love some people like to, rag on Robert Pattinson's Batman a little bit just because they made him, like, kinda, like, emo and, like, grunge, I guess, a little bit, but I felt like I don't know, I was looking at Christian Bale's Batman, and I was like, "No, I think he has a little eye makeup on too." Like, I think that he,
He
darkens his eyes a little bit under the mask, like,
Under the mask, he
same as
does, yeah.
same
When
as,
he takes off the
Robert.
mask, though, when he takes off the mask, though, I don't think there's really
Yeah,
only one sequence that I can really vividly recall where he like takes off the mask and like
on
does
camera.
does stuff with the rest of the suit on without the mask, and that's when he's with Rachel in Batman Begins, when he has to like sedate her. After he sedates her and she falls asleep, he takes the mask off and he like stares at her, and
Yeah,
that's it. I
yeah.
I think that's the only moment I can think of off the top of my head where he actually does.
No,
So
yeah.
that, which was a bold choice of Matt Reeves, because it's like, oh no, like the black makeup is not just for the aesthetic, it's also to hide his identity in a way,
Yeah,
which I think is cool.
yeah.
But well, let's get into these
Um,
thoughts.
okay, so let's start with Batman Begins. It came out in 2005, which right off the bat, you wouldn't even be able to tell that this movie came out in 2005. Like, the graphics and the visuals are so good, and I think it's mainly because Christopher Nolan does everything as real as he can, and,
Yeah.
he every effect that he can do, he does,
Practically.
tangibly,
Mhm.
practically. Thank you, that's the word.
I knew you were
And
searching
it
for it.
and it really, really serves the film. I don't know if anybody has ever had this take, but I think that when they do practical effects, it might look a little better than visual.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was directed by Christopher Nolan. I also jotted down because I was curious for myself if any of these movies got any sort of recognition from any of the big award shows, and turns out that Batman Begins was nominated at the Oscars for Best Cinematography. Did not win that year, but it did get the nom.
Hmm.
So
Curious to
right off the
see what
bat,
they
Jill.
win.
Okay, so
Right
here's
off the bat.
my
Take a drink every time Kelsey says right off the bat.
yeah,
Mm.
seriously. Here's my short little summary for Batman Begins. In the wake of his parents' death, Bruce Wayne grapples with his desire for justice and revenge as he takes down the mob boss running Gotham and embraces his vigilante alter ego, the Batman.
There we go. It lost cinematography to Memoirs of a Geisha, which I guess makes sense.
Mm,
That's a pretty film. Yeah, it's the origin, and I think
yeah,
nowadays we kind of take for granted origin films based on all the DC stuff we've seen, especially with like the DCEU, which is now dead, of course, but like you know
yeah,
a lot of these films have these origin stories like Wonder Woman, or even the first Man of Steel, stuff like that we've talked about. But I think this was so interesting because you bring up the 2005, and it doesn't look like it's 2005. It looks it really holds up well. But the important thing to
Mhm.
note is at that time, origin stories were still like kind of a up and coming thing, at least for DC, because the older Batman stuff of the 80s and 90s, like Tim Burton's Batman, and then of course, the Joel Schumacher Batman, which almost sunk the Batman franchise altogether with Batman and Robin. It was very much
Mm.
like you just were introduced to Batman. He was already Batman. He was kind of just fighting crime, and you never really understood why he wore the suit and why he did what he did. It was more so
Yeah.
it was a different story we had already established, and there's merit to that of not necessarily having to retread an origin. But in 2005, origin stories aren't necessarily beaten to death at that point, so I think it was refreshing to see an
Mhm.
origin story because no one had really explored the origin of Batman on live action. We had seen it with the animated series, but never before in live action with the whole like the pearls outside the theater with the parents, the movie theater, where obviously like that image of the mother's pearls scattered about because they get shot, and it's a very sad, very tragic backstory. And also
Mhm.
they add the element of him with the actual physical bats too, which I think is
Mhm.
always a haunting sequence and imagery. But I think that's one thing Christopher Nolan doesn't get enough credit for is he kind of established the modern origin story to come. Like he kind of rejuvenated superhero movies in the sense, not just stylistically, which we'll talk about in a sec, but also just in the way he made origin stories and like really wanted to commit to making us know this character through and through before we even get to the action of what the character is going to actually accomplish in this film. Because a lot of this film is just set up an exposition and backstory, which I think nowadays might be a little less like I might have a little less enthusiasm for it. But when I put myself in the brain of 2005, I think it's really cool. So
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure, for sure. So my first note on my page for this movie is just Liam Neeson exclamation point, which
yeah.
makes me want to bring up the fact that this movie has a stacked cast. It may not have felt like it back in 2005, but now knowing how all these people's careers have now, gone on to
Mhm.
do amazing things, like you're watching this movie and you're like, "Oh my god, that's them." And then
Well,
you're putting out
and
all these people.
yeah, the big one is Killian Murphy, obviously,
Cillian
because
Murphy.
because back then he was the guy that Nolan just kind of put in his movies as like that cool supporting character, and he has a big role to play in this one. He's the if you had to say who is the Batman villain in this film, it is Scarecrow. I mean, the main
Yeah.
villain is probably either Falcone or Ra's al Ghul, but I think in terms of the
Yeah.
comics, like who's the more notable face, like who's the one that you pulled off the page of the drawing? It's Scarecrow. So I think it's cool also
Yeah.
because they're not going for the easy, they're not hitting us over the head right off the gate with Riddler or Joker or Penguin, any of these kind of cartoonish ones. They're kind of keeping it a little bit more grounded, a little bit more like it could be realistic in your own city. And I think that's one thing
Yeah.
I kind of teased earlier is the aesthetic of just like making it feel so grounded and relatable to where you said it, practical effects do such a long, go such a long way here because you feel like this city could be your own. And I think that's what made
Mhm.
people love these movies so much is this relatability of the space. But yeah, back to Cillian Murphy though, it's really cool seeing him in this role because he's not Oscar winner Cillian Murphy yet. He's not even Oppenheimer star Cillian Murphy. Cillian Murphy wasn't
Yeah.
even that until Oppenheimer. Like it took so long for him to be like this household name now. And I guess if you watch him on Peaky Blinders, that's different. But really, he wasn't a huge movie star until this year. So it's really cool to see him like kind of a younger Cillian Murphy and doing it with different accent. And yeah, I really like him in
Yeah.
this. But it's really cool. You're right. Like it is a stacked cast, save for maybe one person that the public seems to not be a fan of in this film, and that's why she gets recast in the next one.
Oh,
But um,
yeah. I mean,
maybe a
yeah,
weakling, but not her
we
fault.
can yeah, we can talk about that character at some point down the line. But yeah, we have Liam Neeson in this, Michael Caine as Alfred, obviously Christian Bale's Batman, Cillian Murphy as the Scarecrow, Morgan Freeman as Mr. Fox.
Yeah.
Just like all these faces that I did not expect to pop up in this movie. And I'm glad you said what you said about the villain still, because I literally, my note on the next page was that even though you can kind of pinpoint three different villains in this movie, I thought that it did such a good job of like layering all these different plot points and
Hmm.
kind of making each one a higher stake for
Hmm.
Batman, because
Right.
obviously we kind of have like Murphy's Dr. Crane kind of like lurking in the shadows. You know he's up to no good, but you don't really see him in action until like at least halfway through the film. And
Hmm.
he's scary as Scarecrow. Like
Oh
it's
yeah.
really terrifying how he blows smoke in people's faces. It makes them hallucinate. He puts on the scary mask and it like makes people think that they're clinically insane. So then he takes them back to his like asylum where he's just like torturing them and driving them insane. Like he's such a crazy brand of evil. And then Falcone is just like the classic, just like mob boss running the city, who he takes down. I want to say like also somewhere along the halfway point. So when it was happening, I was like, okay, so what else is this movie gonna be if like this is our main villain and he's already, he's got him strapped to the spotlight, which was so cool because it was so cool to see like these early beginnings of like everything that we know, like, the bat signal and like how like that came about and just like all these like little moments. I thought that everything was kind of like done so well. And you had said something else, Dale, about how like Gotham kind of feels like your own city,
Yeah.
and I love how it really feels like a different new city. Like it doesn't just
Right.
feel like they're in New York or they're
Yeah.
in Chicago. Like
Yeah,
I
I
think they
believe
probably filmed in
Chicago was like the basis of it, but it still feels
yeah,
like its own city just by the
yeah,
personality of it and the darkness of it,
mhm,
because it is a very grim
yeah,
city. They don't bring a lot of light to it, and this is something I
yeah,
want to touch on. The reason they picked Christopher Nolan to do this is because Batman and Robin was such a flop, both financially and
mm,
critically. It was deemed one of the worst films of all time, and
mm,
since then, even Kevin Feige from Marvel said that like Batman and Robin is the most important superhero film ever made because it kind of made everyone change what they thought superhero movies were about. And that's why in the 2000s we get films like this, or like the X-Men movies in Marvel, or like the Spider-Man Raimi trilogy, all these movies, The
mm,
Incredibles even, which is an original, but still like these movies that are so different because what was happening in the 90s was not working. And those
mm,
movies, the last two, especially Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, Forever has a charm to it, but Batman and Robin is so cartoonish and so
mm,
bad for so many people. And I kind of find it enjoyable. Matt and I covered it on Frame Rec. Like it is
mhm,
enjoyable, but it is bad. And I think it's one of
yeah,
those things where Nolan was like, I want to do something completely different because we
yes,
can't have anyone thinking of the other ones. We want everyone to be thinking about this version. And that's why he wanted Christian Bale too because he's such a grounded actor, but he could play kind of the darkness of Batman because he just did American Psycho, but also he can play the more like kind of underdog fighter type that we love to see in his younger work when he was like in Newsies and Empire of the Sun,
mhm,
these redeemable, rootable qualities. But I really like how Christopher
yeah,
Nolan took the approach to make this darker, not necessarily like it's still action packed, but it's not like slow and drab and boring, but just
mm-mm,
darker in
mm-mm,
general. And it's
yeah,
different from a lot of superhero movies, even now when you look back. And I think there's a reason the DCU didn't succeed is because they were just trying to replicate everything that the Dark Knight was. Every movie had to be darker, and it worked for one or two of
mm,
them when Zack Snyder did it. But the more it went on and went on and went on, it wasn't working anymore. The darkness of it, and then that's why the lightness of the Suicide Squad, finally made them think
mhm,
maybe James Gunn can bring another flavor to this because we had the cheesy stuff
mhm,
from the 80s and 90s. Now we have the Christopher Nolan stuff, but now we're replicating it too much with the DCU. So let's scrap it and go back to something kind of in the middle of the silly and the serious, which is I think what we're going to get
yeah,
with James Gunn's. But I
yeah,
think Christopher Nolan really kind of set a trend that ended up being a bad trend of making everything too dark, but a really
mm,
refreshing trend at the time because superhero movies at that point were still so light and colorful and fun and fanciful. Like the sets in the Tim Burton movies, they look like cardboard, like you could poke it and they would all fall down because it's like this almost like painted comic book like artifice. It
yeah,
feels like a real city, like you said, but also a unique city. It still has a personality. It's a really cool stylistic approach, which I think is the
yeah,
main reason I like this film so much is the style. Because I think the stories in the next two are more interesting. But I think the style here is what really ropes you in.
yeah, 100%. There was also there's a, when he discovers, well, like you said, Dill, at the beginning of all of this, he does kind of have this like bat phobia that he's dealing with in the film, which I thought could get kind of campy and like
Yeah.
just like a little cheesy for me. But honestly, like I liked that we had that like, you know, kind of prologue to understand like why a bat? Why does he take on the
Hmm.
persona of a bat? And it's because like he's trained like with the training he does with Liam Neeson's character, like he trains to like accept his fear and become his fear. And like that's like his biggest obstacle at the beginning of this film is that
Yeah.
he's traumatized by this moment of him falling in a well when he was a boy. And so he like it really like makes sense like later on. Like I just thought that it was so smart to write that and then to find like the cave underneath his like mansion, which is like obviously later becomes like the Bat Cave. Um, and there was this moment that I wrote down. It was like one of the first times that we see him in like the full suit. He's like going. I think it was during like the shipment scene where he like actually like traps um Falcone. And he's taken down all of his thugs, and he's just doing that thing where he pops up in a camera. A character looks to see where he is, and he's already gone, and
Mhm.
he's like gone before you can really place where he is, and it's just like super super cool and like suspenseful and almost kind of like a horror element almost. Until
Yeah.
finally one of the goons like yells out like, "Where are you?" And then he just like his head is upside down, appears right behind him and goes, "I'm here." And then I was like, "Oh," like it was just like one
Yeah,
of
it's
those moments
scary.
I was like, "Oh my god,
Yeah.
it's so cool." And then obviously like I heard the iconic like, "I'm Batman." And I was like, "I'm eating this up. I'm loving it." I'm like, "I'm having such a good time." Like I thought I was nervous going into this movie. I was like, I don't know. It feels kind of like broy. It feels kind of like a movie made by men
I
for
mean,
men.
it is.
And
Yeah.
it is,
Yeah.
and so I was nervous that I wasn't gonna find anything that I like really could like really get into with it. But I did, and I think it's mainly because one of my notes is literally Christian Bale is hot. So I think it got my attention.
Mhm. And I I think another reason why you said the broy thing, which is important, is
Yeah.
Christopher Nolan has always been criticized for not necessarily knowing how to write women. And I know that's a
Thank
fault. That is a
Yep.
fault, but I also think if you know a lot about Christopher Nolan, let me tell you right now, he does not own a cell phone. He doesn't allow chairs on his film sets. He's a weird
I've
dude.
heard this.
He's a weird dude. But
Yeah.
I really just think it's him kind of just having his own outlook, and it's just that he doesn't necessarily know how to write women because he's not
Not a
quite.
woman.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I just think he's kind of telling his own version of his own story, which I don't think is great.
Mhm.
Like I think you should be able to get that full round, well-rounded perspective. But it's like
Yeah.
I get why his scripts are the way they are, and why women are almost alienated so much. You know, not purposefully, but just based on his own personal way and his way he approaches his life. It's interesting to see how the women, because it's kind of a consistent thing in all his films. In Oppenheimer, Emily Blunt kind of gets a lot meatier of a role than you'd expect out of a Christopher Nolan movie, but Florence Pugh kind
Mhm.
of fits more into the more conventional, like
The
she's kind of
stereotype.
underserved. But I think that's more of like a trademark of his own filmmaking style and kind of the downfalls of his filmmaking style at times. I just think it's very interesting how he writes his women characters, more so than it is something we should really like be like shame on you. I think it's more of like he just doesn't really know, and it's one of those things where
Yeah.
he's just kind of maybe not the right person to tell a woman's story, which is why he doesn't try. And I appreciate him for not trying to do that. If, because
Yeah.
it would be a lot worse, I think, if he tried to make like a Barbie and failed. But
Right.
then
Sure.
sticking in his own lane. But I do see the criticisms, and I think Holmes here is not quite great. I think she's the one weak link of the cast. But then the second film, I
Mhm.
think they got a really good casting replacement. The only thing
Mhm.
is, I think that character, Rachel's character in that film, is even more of a damsel in distress than she is here. But I
Mhm.
still think at least they tried to give her a big role and give her a lot to do, because Rachel Dawes is one of the more prominent women figures in all his filmography. But I think it's important to note because I think he gets a lot of hate for it, and like deservingly so, but also undeservingly so. Like I think it's more of a nuanced thing, and it's kind of like you have to understand who Christopher Nolan is, and it makes a little more sense. Not to justify it, but it does kind of at least add
No,
the
yeah.
context.
And I get what you're saying, Dill. Like, I think I'd rather prefer a more boring woman than like a woman who's like hypersexualized or like
Right.
written to be very male gazy. Like, at least he's not writing a woman like that. I mean,
Right.
you can't even really say that, like, even, in The Dark Knight Rises with like Selena Kyle, who could like easily fall into like a trap of like just, like whatever men do. And
Mhm.
that's how men write. This is my
Oh,
impression
of
of a man
course. Yeah.
writing.
No, I've been taking notes here. If you
Yeah,
see my
yeah,
hand
yeah.
going like this.
And even there, like he didn't, do like fall into any some sort of like stereotype or trap with that character. And I think it's just because like like you've been saying, he just does not know how to write a woman. So
Right.
therefore he just like does the best he can, and he's like, and that's it. That's what I can do.
And I think it's a
So
testament to,
it
like,
comes from a
Maggie. Yeah.
very innocent place.
Yeah,
So it's
innocent,
almost
that's a good.
forgivable. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
And I also think having Maggie Gyllenhaal and Anne Hathaway elevating those roles. I mean, we've seen Maggie Gyllenhaal go on to be a great director in and of herself with The Lost
Mhm.
Daughter, but also Anne Hathaway is such a great actress that I feel like they bring a lot to the roles that aren't even on the page, which I think is important. Where I don't think Katie Holmes has that ability necessarily. I think she's a fine actress, but she doesn't necessarily know how to elevate something the way the other
Yeah.
two do. So I think that's also why it's a little bit more forgivable because those actresses elevate it. I mean, in The Prestige, it's Scarlett Johansson; she can elevate.
Yeah.
It's Florence Pugh and Emily Blunt in Oppenheimer; they can elevate it. I think it's all
Mhm.
about and Elliot Page. He was identifying as Ellen Page back when Inception came out. They
Mhm.
elevated that. I think that's the thing is all these
Mhm.
roles for female characters are elevated because of the actors portraying them too, which helps. Whereas I think that's the thing that Katie Holmes doesn't necessarily do. She's kind of saying the words on the page. And it's whatever. I think the story though is more interesting than her performance, like the actual backstory, because that's an interesting backstory as well. Because she's an added character that is not a comic character. Rachel
Mm.
does, so I think that's interesting.
Does Batman have like
Yeah,
a
I mean,
a
I think
Lois Lane?
in the Burton films, it was like one of the reporters, I think, like something like
Okay.
that, where it's like there is someone,
Or I
but it's
guess
always it's kind of the old school James Bondy thing of like it doesn't really matter, which is cool because he actually really tries to
mm,
make it matter at least their relationship because their
mhm,
relationship I think is the crux of the second film for sure.
mhm, mhm. Honestly, Dale, as long as we're talking about things that we can be a little critical about, one of the things that I noticed, especially in this film, not so much The Dark Knight, but especially in The Dark Knight Rises, is that some of these scenes can get a little exposition-y and a
Yeah,
lot of, like, talking at me and giving a lot of information to the audience in,
sure.
like, a span of 20 seconds. Like, that was, I felt like, the biggest drawback with, Katie Holmes's Rachel in this movie in particular, because I just feel like she had one really good scene, and it was just to, like, get as much information to the audience as possible, and it was a lot of telling and not showing, which I don't didn't love in these films.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Um, so yeah, that was
Yeah,
just one of the things that I definitely, docked it a few points in my rating
yeah.
at the end of the
I
day.
think he's gotten much better with his writing just over time. I think his
Yeah.
style and his spectacle has always been grade A, but he's only become a better writer with time, which I think is a good thing. Because this is still early. This is only his fourth film. So I think he's really kind
Yeah.
of grown. And then after Batman Begins, he does the Prestige between Batman Begins and Dark Knight, and then between Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises is when he does Inception. So he always has a film in between. So I think he just kind of grows with every film in terms of his writing. But no, it's a great origin story. It's great. I think it's a little more forgettable now that we've seen so many origin stories come out from other studios and just over time with this genre. But I do think it's solid.
Yeah. And the last complaint I have, Dill, this is so trivial and so minor, but I hate the title. I hate it. I
Okay.
wish it was different.
What do you
Batman
wish it
Begins,
was?
I just, like, don't like it. I wish it was like Batman: The Beginning or something like that. Like, I just feel like
Well, Batman
Batman
Begins
Begins
flows.
I don't think it does. I disagree. But also, now that it is a trilogy that we're talking about here, and maybe they didn't know it was gonna be a trilogy when they first released this film,
Mm,
but I feel like if we're gonna do, like, the Dark Knight theme and call it the Dark Knight, like, trilogy, then maybe the first film should have, The Dark Knight, The Beginning or something, like, as the title.
right.
'Cause now
Yeah,
it's
that's
just, like, hurting the OCD in my brain that each of the movies don't, it's not like The Dark Knight something, The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like they should all be
yeah.
symmetrical.
Like this one should have been The Dark Knight. The next one should have been The Dark Knight Rises, and then the third one is like The Dark Knight Rises again. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know. I don't know.
something
Or The
like
Dark
that.
Knight Falls, or The Death of the Dark Knight, or something.
Or
That'd been cool.
yes, something like that.
Mm, all right.
Exactly.
Cool. Maybe he
So,
doesn't hasn't earned the knight. Maybe he's the Dark Prince right now,
yeah,
or
right.
the Dark Jester. The Dark Jester. Speaking of jesters, the last scene, the Joker card. What a fun tease. So I don't necessarily know if he knew it was going to be a full trilogy, but I think they knew they were going to
Mm,
make one more, and he didn't want to start with the Joker because he wanted to focus this one on Batman because he knew the Joker would
mhm,
be it was all kind of building to the Joker. So I like how the
Yeah.
last one is like Gary Oldman's character kind of flips over the card, and it's the Joker card, which is so awesome.
Also, another actor I forgot to mention, Gary freaking Oldman, and it's
Serious? Go ahead.
because I didn't even realize it was Gary Oldman. Like, he was so transformed, I didn't recognize him at all. I didn't even realize, like, I was,
Is it?
IMDbing, and I was what?
I was gonna say, is it that he's transformed, or is he transformed in everything else that the normal Gary Oldman doesn't strike you? Because this is the normal Gary Oldman.
Probably a combination of both, Dill. No, well, I think it's also like he's so transformative as an actor itself that even when he's just his normal self, he takes on a completely different physicality. He has an accent in this movie. Like, I think that he's just a chameleon in everything that he does, so he's hard to spot. So I didn't even realize it was him until the second movie. I was like, holy shit, that's Gary Oldman.
Wait till you watch Oppenheimer. He has an amazing cameo. Amazing cameo. Okay. Well, we'll have to watch that soon. All right. What did you give this one?
I gave this one a 7.9 out of 10.
Cool. So like almost an 8 because I gave it an 8. So like, we're both on the same page.
So we're on the same page.
Cool.
Okay, The Dark Knight, 2008, directed by Christopher Nolan. Okay. A new villain arrives in Gotham, wreaking havoc on criminals and civilians alike, as Bruce Wayne tries to navigate personal relationships, keep the political peace, and put a stop to the Joker's antics. Now, this film was nominated for a bunch of stuff at the Academy Awards. It was nominated for Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Makeup, Best Sound Editing, and Best Visual Effects. It was also it won for 2 things at the Oscars. It won for Best Sound Editing. Oh, sorry. It was nominated for Best Sound Mixing, but it won for Best Sound Editing. Different.
Do you know what the difference is? Do you remember?
Of course I do. Please, Jill, you know what? This is more your expertise, so I know, but for those
they've
of us
they've combined them since. They've combined the categories since, but sound editing is the actual creation of the sound effects. Sound mixing is how they mix all the sounds together. So if you like watch a lot of movie musicals will be up for sound mixing because it's like, how do you incorporate the orchestra with the singing and with this and this that, whereas like making like when E.T. walks and it goes, that's sound editing because you're editing sound, you're making sound. So the Foley artists are the editing, and the mixing is putting it all together.
Right, of course. As now, anyone who didn't know, who wasn't me, because I already knew, now that person knows. So, also tragically, not tragically, but amazingly, Heath Ledger was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, and he won the award that night, but was unable to accept it because he had already passed before the awards, night of the awards. So I believe his sister accepted it on his behalf, either his sister or his mother. And he swept that award season with this role. He also won the Golden Globe for this role, and he also won the SAG-AFTRA award this year for Best Supporting.
And I'll tell you right now, he would have Dead or Alive, I think. And I think that's an argument that a lot of people have said, like, he only won it because he died. I'm like, fuck off, because there are people who die who don't win. Like Chadwick Boseman did not win. And I think that goes to show people aren't just going to vote for someone because they died. They're voting for it because I legitimately think it's the best performance ever given on anything in any movie ever. Rivaled maybe only by like 2 or 3 other performances, which are all kind of in the same category. It's like Christoph Waltz for Inglourious Basterds, this for Dark Knight, and then maybe Natalie Portman and Black Swan for me. Like those are my top 3 maybe. And even then, like I don't even know. But like this one still, it just stands out above the rest. It's just such a good performance. And I think that's kind of, everyone says it's the Joker movie. And I think there's a lot more to it, especially rewatching it. There's a lot about Rachel and Bruce, and there's also a ton about Harvey. I think the Harvey stuff is actually sometimes more interesting than anything else. But I think Joker, he has the moments. He has the scenes you remember. And it's just such a well-realized character, even though the means about which he went about creating this character were pretty tough, because he literally locked himself in a hotel room for a month to get all the mannerisms down and figure out the way of speaking, and kind of essentially went crazy and got addicted to stuff. Who's to say if the addiction stemmed from this, but it was definitely enhanced by this role, which is sad. But
Mhm.
it's sometimes people just put so much into their work that it consumes them, and it's unfortunate. But I mean, it gives us a damn good performance nonetheless.
Yeah, 100%. It's so heartbreaking because he would have just gone on, like, this was like, he was already a very established actor before
Yeah.
this film. He had a lot of great roles under his belt, but I feel like this really would have been the performance that catapulted him into, like, superstardom. Like, he would have been up there with, like, the absolute best of the best. He would have
Mm.
definitely gone on to been nominated and awarded more Oscars, and it just, just gone entirely too soon. Just
It's such
such
a
a
shame.
talented man.
Yeah. Yeah.
My I think my favorite of all time for sure.
Hmm.
And so one of my first notes for this movie too was I need subtitles to watch these movies. I don't know what it is. Like everyone just says like very quietly, especially with the Batman voice. Like I'm just like I'm not a subtitle person. I usually don't watch anything with subtitles, but these films I was like I need them. I
Well,
can't understand what
there's
anyone's
there's a reason
saying.
it won't sound editing, but not sound mixing, because the sound mixing in Nolan's movies are not top notch until I'd say
Yeah,
maybe Oppenheimer and Dunkirk are. But there's some he
yeah.
really, and I think the reason for it is he loves to film with IMAX cameras. And when you film with IMAX cameras, it's not digital, so you don't have that ability to link the digital sound to the projection. So a lot of sound that comes from IMAX filmed movies is actual sound from the camera itself, rather than trying. When you film something digitally, it's much easier to capture the sound in a stronger way. And he doesn't use a lot of ADR in his films, so a lot of the dialogue can sometimes get masked because it's a lot of natural sound. And I think that's a pro and a con. And I agree. I think it makes the film look really great, but in terms of the sound, I think the sound suffers a bit. I agree with you. I think the sound
Yeah.
mixing in all his films, to some extent, I mean, especially Tenet, that one was really poorly mixed. But that it's just because of he likes the
Yeah.
practicality, and with that comes sometimes some shitty sound if he gets the wrong shot.
So that was my first note. I also the Scarecrow makes an appearance in this movie. I think
Briefly,
Christopher
he's there.
Nolan might really like Cillian Murphy.
Yeah.
I
Well,
read this IMDb fact, like they have these little
yeah.
trivia facts on the IMDb pages for all the movies. I don't who knows how true they are, but I had read this one that said like Christopher Nolan was like loved how blue Cillian Murphy's eyes are so much that like he tried to make like Dr. Crane like he tried to find a way for Dr. Crane to take off his glasses in the movie like as much as possible just so like the audience would see them.
Yeah.
And I just think that like that's so funny. Like I'm just feel like I'm watching like the beginning of like such a
A
beautiful
bromance.
friendship between
Yeah.
between
Mhm.
the two of them. Yeah, exactly. A
Yeah.
bromance.
Dude, that's so cool. Yeah,
Um
so, he's in a lot of his movies, and Michael Caine is in all but, I think, one movie of his, and that's Oppenheimer, because he's now retired. But, Michael Caine is in a lot of
wow.
his movies. Michael Caine's in his 90s now, but, like, yeah,
Yeah.
Michael Caine is in a lot of his movies, and Cillian Murphy. Like, those are the 2 that if you're watching a Nolan movie, you're probably guaranteed to see one, if not both of them. Cillian
Wow.
Murphy is a good role in Inception, too. He has a really cool role in Inception, but
Oh,
yeah,
I've
those are the
seen
2.
Inception. Do you remember what he does in
I
that one?
believe he's the son of the guy that like they're trying to do the whole thing for. Remember how it's hard to explain, because isn't the whole
Leonardo
thing?
DiCaprio's son?
No, 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 no. So remember they're trying to like get a key to unlock something for like this old man who's like dying.
Yeah.
Old man that's dying son is Killing Murphy.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. This was the movie where I realized it was Gary Oldman because I said Gary Oldman is the cop. Holy shit, I didn't recognize him.
Yeah.
Obviously, as we said before, we got the recast of Maggie Gyllenhaal, who, definitely elevated the role of Rachel for sure.
I wonder what those
Um,
conversations on set were like, where because Heath Ledger did Brokeback Mountain with Jake Gyllenhaal, so I wonder if Maggie was like, "How was fucking my brother?" I wonder.
oh my god, yeah, you're right.
I wonder how awkward, or
Um,
I bet they were probably close. I bet they were like, because
yeah,
they did that movie together. And Heath Ledger's wife was also at the time, Michelle Williams was also in Brokeback Mountain with them as well, and Anne Hathaway. So it
yeah,
was like a big family
yeah,
thing. So
yeah, yeah,
maybe I
yeah.
bet they're all just close friends. I bet Jake and Jake and Heath were close, but I think that must have been funny. Actually, no, they probably never had that conversation because I believe Heath Ledger stayed in character on set.
Oh, yeah, no, you're so right.
Yeah. So that probably
Yeah,
didn't happen. But they were probably close before this though. So it's probably cool to do a film. So he's done a film with both
yeah.
Gyllenhaals, which is cool.
collecting all the Gyllenhaals.
Yeah,
This was also the
whole
movie
two.
where we got our iconic Batman quote, which I've heard before, but never in the movie in which it came from, which was, "You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain," which was very fun for me. Fun little first I had.
Mm,
Um, Oh, this one had a lot of interesting layers to it, Dill, that I wanted to discuss with you. The
mhm,
first being that we kind of like in the first movie, kind of, but in this movie especially, we see Batman kind of have a lot of character flaws. I mean, I
yeah,
guess I should say Bruce Wayne have a lot of character flaws
mhm,
because he's like not dealing with the fact that him and Rachel are not together. So he's just kind of like throwing his money around. He's got different girls on his arm. He's making scenes at parties. He's just like acting like a jealous, like douchebag. Like he's
yeah.
just, you know, and so it was interesting to like kind of like, see that side of him. I literally was like, why is Bruce acting like such an asshole? That was one of the notes that I wrote. And so we kind of obviously like our main villain of this movie is the Joker, but then we get in our third act a whole new villain added to the storyline. And I couldn't tell, so I wanted to get your opinion on it, your feedback. I
Mm.
I wrote down, I was like, is the Harvey Dent storyline too much? Like, is adding this right at the end, like, random, or is that just
I
me, or
I like
I
to
don't know,
believe I like to believe it's kind of like I said earlier. I think
necessary?
The Dark Knight could take on multiple meanings. It's not just
Mm,
Batman, the Dark Knight. It could also be the fact that he is this white knight, this symbol of hope, and because of this mayhem and chaos, the one symbol of good has turned evil. I think that's
mm,
something to say about the political climate and the society, which I think is really important. I also think having seen how successful the first film was and probably knowing that this film was going to be a smash success as well, I even read that Nolan wanted to make a third movie and have the Joker be the center of that one as well. And it wasn't until he passed where they had to rethink the whole plan. But I really think it was one of those things where he honestly wanted
yeah,
Harvey to take the spotlight at the end. It was almost like, let's make the Joker the spotlight. And then by the third act, we can kind of phase him out because we'll have him back for the next one. And now we'll make it more about Harvey. Because I really
yeah,
think if you look at it as a Batman movie, I think the Harvey Dent stuff is more prominent than the Joker stuff. I think the Joker is very, kind of adjacent to Batman. He's a main villain, obviously, and because of the
mhm,
performance we remember him, and he's got a lot of screen time. But I think the main
mhm,
conflict is what you talk about, the Bruce, the character flaws because of Rachel and Harvey. And I think the pinnacle of
yeah,
this movie is where he does save Harvey because he's obviously tricked into going to the wrong location, and he saves Harvey instead of Rachel. And he
yeah,
goes through saving Harvey because he realizes that the people need a symbol, but then that obviously tears Harvey apart too. And I think it goes to show that Rachel tore Bruce apart, but Rachel was alive. Harvey lost Rachel, and now he's dealing with it too. And I think that's also interesting to see because they both lost the love of their life. Just one
yeah,
lost her while she was still there, and one lost her after the fact. I think Harvey's character is actually every time I watch it, I love his character arc more and more. I just
yeah,
think the villain turn for the first watch is definitely very surprising. I think if you don't
yeah,
know that Harvey Dent is Two Face, which is also interesting, but if you know the comics and it's like, oh, Harvey Dent, that's Two Face, right? Why is he this like really nice, charismatic guy? Seeing the
yeah,
turn is very interesting, but I agree, it does kind of not come out of left field, but it does happen very late. But I do think based on how it goes, and especially how it ends with Gary Oldman's character and all that, like I think it really builds to something really interesting that I wish they could have followed up on in the next film even more. But I think it's one of those things where with the circumstances of Heath Ledger, they just kind of had to start from scratch and kind of rethink the third one altogether. But I really think it sets up some interesting stuff, and I think it's something you don't see in a lot of movies where like villain origins villain origin stories usually happen in the first act and then they're the villain for the rest of the movie. This is one where he
yeah,
is a hero for most of it, and it's exactly the quote you said: "You're either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain." And it's kind
yeah,
of important for Bruce to see because he's like, "Holy shit! I watched this guy literally go fall from grace." I don't know. I love the Harvey Dent stuff,
yeah.
but it is very interesting. You bring up a good point.
Well, it's just troubling for me because, like you've been saying, Dill, it's like because all of like his trauma happens, towards the back half of the movie, I expected him to be set up for the villain for the third one, for the Dark
Mm,
Knight Rises. I was like, okay, so like we're gonna end with like him getting all angry and upset, and then he's gonna come after Batman in the next movie. But then I just felt like, oh, if he's gonna have this complete like turnaround, do this complete 180 and then be kind of like the second villain in in this film. I just felt like maybe the turnaround should have come at like the halfway point, so
Mhm.
then it didn't feel so like, because I don't know, I just felt like it almost was a little unnatural how quickly and how drastically his character changed in the
Mhm.
back half of this
Yeah.
movie.
But I
Um,
mean, sometimes it is that drastic too, because I mean, he
mhm,
literally loses his girlfriend
and
and
have his face.
has to live. And I think it's less so about his girlfriend dying and more so that he has to live knowing that and knowing
Yeah,
that like Batman saved one of them and he saved the wrong one type deal. And
yeah,
I think they both deal with that because Batman he doesn't want to save Harvey, he wants to save Rachel, but I think he still goes through with saving Harvey because he knows what that means for the people.
right,
Yeah, I
exactly.
think it's more of like that immediate kind of like I have nothing to live for. This sucks. Like this just sucks. And his face is also fucked up, which also doesn't
Yeah,
help. Yeah, I think if he had survived it clean, there might have been redeeming qualities. But the fact that he has to like lie, there's definitely pain there. Just physical pain. I think he's just kind of
mhm,
pissed and
mhm.
over it. So yeah, it's a sad
Yeah.
turn. It's sad. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, what I will say though, the setup for making Batman kind of like the villainous person and like taking on kind of like all of Harvey's sins. So like the town can go on believing that, Harvey Dent was still like this great guy until the very end, was definitely a really interesting note to end on, and was definitely setting up an interesting tone for the next one. I will say. Um we have only good things to say about Maggie Gyllenhaal. She didn't do anything wrong in this movie, but for some reason I was like, why I was like, we've watched Christian Bale counter with 2 different women now with the in the same role, and I just don't think he had chemistry with either one of them. And
Mm,
I'm like, I'm not saying it's like a fault on either of them. I just think that 2 actors have chemistry or they don't. And I don't think it's something that you can push or like kind of force
yeah.
on
Well,
stage or on camera.
it could be what we just talked about, where it's like, oh, that's Jake's sister, like. And I know Christian Bale. They're all probably buddies. I mean, they're all around the same age, growing up, kind of coming of age, and like bursting onto the scene at the same time. Like Donnie
Yeah.
Darko is happening at the same time American Psycho is. So like Jake Gyllenhaal, Christian Bale, Heath Ledger, they're all kind of merging on the scene at the same time, to where it probably was a little weird. And I also think it just comes down to the writing of it too, and just the idea that it is a
Yeah.
new cast member too, so for the audience it might be a little jarring too, where it takes them some time to warm into it too. I don't know. I still really like it. I think also part of it is that Bruce himself is awkward. He doesn't really necessarily know how to connect because he has
Sure.
to live this dual life, and I really just think because he's deprived of parents at a young age, and he's kind of lived in this seclusion for so long. I think it really just kind of makes him hard. It makes it hard for him to love, and I think that's real
Yeah.
for a lot of people who go through trauma at such a young age. They have these social awkwardnesses about them. I just wish you're right. Like the film had made that a little more aware, a little more
Yeah.
evident, rather than just like coming across as a lack of chemistry. But you make a good point for sure.
Yeah, I can definitely buy that. It was just like because I felt that they lacked chemistry, I wasn't necessarily rooting for them to like get together. So it like they're kind of this like love triangle that they had going on. I didn't necessarily like need. You know what I mean? But
Yeah, and that's
it
yeah.
it is like it fuels a lot of character development for Bruce and for Batman though. So like I totally understand like why it's happening there.
Well,
The
in the
other note
moment
that I
where she is dying, sorry to cut you off real quick,
no, no,
just
no,
on
go
that
ahead.
note, when she does die, I think that's important because, like you just said, it's for Bruce and Batman. Because Batman has to save Harvey, Bruce has to save Rachel, and that's what's so terrible about it. And it's
Yeah,
one of those things
yeah,
where Batman's racing to it, and ultimately Batman does what he needs to do, and ultimately that
yeah.
leads to something even worse. But I really do think, yeah, it's just so interesting how that scene plays out. And I honestly think a lot of the heartbreak is from the phone call between Harvey and Rachel too. I think that relationship is
Mhm,
actually very well established because
mhm.
you do feel for her because that's who she loves and that's who she really wants to be with. So because he's not a villain at that point, you're kind of rooting for both of them to succeed. It's tough.
Yeah, the moment when they're on the phone together and he bursts through the door and Harvey's just like, "No, why are you here for me?" And you watch her reaction, on the rooftop she's at, and she's like, okay, you know what? Nope, this is okay. And you just kind of have to watch this person like come to terms with their mortality. I was like,
I
yeah,
know. It's so such a
it was
good movie.
intense.
Oh, I love
Yeah, no, it's
it.
so good.
It's so good.
Another thing that I noticed in this movie that I feel like is a Christopher Nolan ism is that he loves a scene where like there's like one source of light coming from one direction, and so then half like the actor's face is in like darkness, and
Yeah.
it just like creates this really interesting duality between the two actors on screen. He does it specifically with one moment between it's in the last scene between him, Harvey Dent and Gordon,
Mhm.
Gary Oldman, and purposefully, like the half of his face that's been burned is in darkness, and so Gary Oldman can only see the half of him that's still, his face. And it was just I noticed it in this movie, but then I was like, "Oh, he did it in the first movie too," with, like
Yeah.
there's, like, a when Liam Neeson and, Christian Bale are talking in, like, the winter and, like, they have the fire going, it's, like, right after he fell through the ice,
Mhm.
like, just be like, the light of the fire just being cast on their 2 faces and, like, no other light is there, it just, like, makes it so, like, intimate
Right.
and intense, you know what I
It is
mean?
cool. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like the best directors know how to tell things without words, and I think that's an example of it. I
Yeah.
wish more directors didn't just phone it in, but it's so good. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and, oh, the reveal when you found out that Gary Oldman was very much not dead saved me, revived
Yeah.
me, because I
Mhm.
was going to be very upset if I did not see him for the rest of this franchise.
He's
I was
great.
like I was like, "Gary Oldman's dead," and then he was like had the gun, like, from behind him, and it was like and then I was like, "Oh, Gary Oldman's alive!" And then
Yeah.
like, goes back to his wife and is like, "Sorry, I had to protect you." She just slaps him right across the
Yeah.
face.
That
Yeah.
shot where it's Heath Ledger without the makeup, that one shot where it's him in the crowd as dressed as a cop and he cocks that gun and he's got oh my god, that's always so
Yeah,
haunting
yeah,
for me
yeah,
because at the
yeah.
time I saw this, I didn't realize who that was because this is the first introduction to Heath Ledger I had as a kid. But then
Mhm.
rewatching other Heath Ledger movies and now knowing what he looks like, seeing that scene, I'm like, oh my god, that's him. So that's
Yeah.
it's just so good. So many little details that I just love so much.
So, Dill, I gave this one a 9 out of 10
Okay.
because it's just great.
Yeah. I have a real personal connection to this. Like this was the film that got me into movies. Like I didn't really talk about it
Mhm.
yet, but like this is a movie that when I saw it as a 10-year-old in 2008, I watched it and I went, "Wow, movies are more than just entertainment. It's more than just this and that. It's more than just story. It's I was noticing things about like freaking like you said the shadows and the staging of it and the editing the way it went back and forth with the Harvey Rachel Batman that whole scene but also the stuff on the ferry the editing in that and just all the editing in this movie just I was like wow it's so even the first sequence which you didn't really talk about but like the whole bank heist where you don't even know which one the Joker is but you figure he's one of them and it's all the guys in the masks and that whole thing like
Mhm.
all of that I was just so into where I think that's really a big reason why I do what I do, why we're sitting here now, not just doing a DC podcast, but doing any podcast in general is because this movie really inspired me to look at film in a different way. So I gave this a 10 out of 10 because this is a meaningful film for that reason and because it has the best performance I've ever seen by any actor, to where that alone is
Yeah.
enough for me to be like, this is a perfect movie. Even though I think there are faults, there are things to talk about. And I think having seen Oppenheimer, I don't think this is his best movie anymore. But I for a while stood by that this was the greatest movie ever made until I saw more movies. But I do think this is one of the best of its kind for sure, but also just so important to me. So I think that's why
Yeah.
like I always love it. I didn't rewatch it for this podcast because I know it by heart. It's one of those things where I didn't need to. I watched some scenes online, but I didn't sit down
Yeah.
and watch the whole thing. I watched Batman Begins because it had to. I've only seen that a few times, but the other two,
Yeah.
I'm like I've watched so much since they came out that I'm like I'm good. I have them in my body, which is kind of a danger because this is a very fucked up movie at times. But I really
Yeah.
just I love this movie, so I gave it a 10. But because of the personal attachment as well, realistically, it'd probably be like a 9.5.
Yeah. And honestly, like, I forgot to mention this before because we've just been, like, gushing about the Joker so much, it's that he's just absolute chaos, like, there's this one scene where the ba he's Batman's taken down somebody. It's, like, somebody close to the Joker, and I think the guy's name is, like, Molina or something or
Yeah,
Maloney, something like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he's like, "Where's the Joker? Like, tell me where he is." And he's like, "Do you think that if you get to the Joker, like, you're gonna be actually, like, able to take him down. Like, you follow rules. Like, we all know your number one rule is you don't kill anyone. He doesn't have rules. He doesn't have loyalty to anyone. Like,
Yeah.
he literally, like, the entire opening bank heist is a bunch of his goons just offing each other one by one because there's no loyalty. Like, they're like, okay, now you do this step and then you're going to kill the guy with you and then you're going to get the money and then the reveal when he's like, hey, did the Joker tell you to kill me? And he was like, oh no, I'm in charge of killing the bus driver. And then the bus comes through the bank and it's like, he's just like absolute mayhem, which makes him such a great, juicy villain because you just genuinely don't know what he's going to do next.
And I mean, there's a reason why in the first film you get a lot of backstory with Liam Neeson's character. In the next film, you got a lot of backstory with Bane. You don't get any backstory with Joker here. You don't need it because he's not a character. He's a caricature. He's brought a lot of humanity by the acting, but he's not supposed to be this person we empathize with that we see all these layers from because he is so manic and so crazy. He's unpredictable in that way. There's no way to get to the core of this guy, which I think is so scary, but also why it's the greatest of all time. So, let's rise again.
Great stuff. The Dark Knight rises, just like Jesus did on Easter. The Dark Knight has risen again. That was a Roman Catholicism joke for those of you who aren't religious. So The Dark Knight Rises came out in 2012. It was directed by Christopher Nolan. It was nominated, actually, the first one that I saw nominated for a Grammy Award for its soundtrack, which that was the big takeaway that I had from this film. I was like, the music was so good. And then it was nominated at the SAG Awards for the stunt ensemble. So yes, years after taking down the Joker, Bruce Wayne has been in hiding until a mysterious woman comes to Gotham to steal his fingerprints and unleash an entirely new criminal syndicate that has Gotham in anarchy.
Yeah.
Anarchy, I tell you.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, I think a lot of people don't love this one as much because it was following the shadow of Dark Knight and because of the whole thing of like, you're never going to get to use Heath Ledger again. They kind of had to pivot away from that. And the villain they chose, a lot of people don't like the way he sounds and talks. And like, there's a lot of things that people are like, we've seen Catwoman before and you can't top Michelle Pfeiffer and like all these things. And then the ending where a lot of people are like, it's so ambiguous and they never follow up with the Robin thing. There's a lot of complaints. And I just said them all. But I still really dig it. And I think it's partially due to the style. I think Christopher Nolan brings so much style. That first scene rivals that bank heist from Dark Knight. Like, that whole plane sequence is so good. And I do think Bane is a very physical, scary presence. And I like how they kind of tie it back to Batman Begins with the Talia al Ghul thing, too. Like, I think it does a good job being a trilogy capper more than it is its own unique film on its own. But I think it works really well with these other two as a companion. But you watch them all back to back to back, so I'd love to get your thoughts on this one, having seen them all tangentially.
Yeah, Dale. I mean, coming off The Dark Knight, like especially literally in the same day, I watched them all today. It's hard to follow up that act with any kind of movie you are. So just this one was my least favorite of the three. I think, in my opinion, it is the weakest, and I think it's mainly because I didn't understand what Bane wanted. Like, I didn't understand his objective as a villain. Like, he just wanted to blow Gotham up. But I was like, why? And then they were trying to tell me why again, not show me why. But, Jill, the ADR is so bad in this movie. They didn't even attempt to make it seem like he was talking like the same day.
Yeah, I need to look at the behind the scenes because in my brain, I always just assumed he was, and then they use his voice in post to make it sound like that. But I guess you're right. He must not have been.
Or whatever they did to his voice, it just like takes me out of it the whole time.
What are you talking about?
And I literally one of the first notes I took was, why does this guy have a muzzle? You know, you find out later something happened to his mouth in childhood. And then the plot twist was fun though, because it was different. We hadn't really gotten an intense plot twist in the first two movies.
Did you realize who the little girl playing
Talia
al Ghul was?
Yeah, I was like, okay, that's Joey King, so I guess she's just playing a little boy. So I still didn't see it coming.
Okay, cool.
I was just like, oh, she's playing a little boy.
Because when that came out, everyone was like, oh my god, that's Baby Bane. And that's when because that's what the film wants you to believe. But I think nowadays, now that you know it's Joey King, a lot of people are like, oh, who's the little? Is she little? She's not Catwoman. Is she Marion Cotillard's character? and that's what she is. But I like
Yeah.
how I saw this at the time where she wasn't a big name yet, Joey King. So like, there's
Yeah.
still that mystery. But now when you rewatch it, if you ever rewatch it, it's probably gonna be like, oh, okay, yeah, I see that coming. But it's a cool twist.
Um, yeah, it was a fun twist because I was like, "Oh no, betrayal, traitor." Um, and yeah, what I will say, loved Anne Hathaway, loved
So good.
Selena Kyle.
Yeah.
I loved her introduction scene where she's like snooping around at, Wayne Manor, and then
Mhm.
he like has the arrow, she gets startled and she just seems like this, "Oh my god, I'm just this ditzy little woman, don't mind me." And then she immediately switches and is like, "Oh, oops." And
Yeah,
then she
she's so
like
good.
yeah, it's a very good turnaround. I actually had just watched a Vanity Fair interview with okay. Yep. I just
I'd
watched
also watch it. Yeah.
a Vanity Fair interview with Anne Hathaway, and she had talked about this movie and this role, and she was like, that's the most fit I've ever been in my life because Christopher Nolan came to me and was like, I want you to do as many of your own stunts as you possibly can. And she worked really hard at getting that backflip right at the beginning of her sequence when she like flips out of the window. She was
Mhm.
very proud of that.
Yeah.
And it
Well, 'cause
was
she grew
just
up as a dancer, right? Like, she was doing shows at Paper Mill,
yeah,
right in town. So, not in town, but, right where
yeah,
we grew up. So, it's kinda cool to
exactly.
see her, like, kind of get in touch with that root. And I like how it's not, like, a beauty thing. Christopher Nolan wasn't like, "I want you to look as sexy as possible," or, "I want you to, like, have a slim figure." It's like, "No, I want you to be able to do the stunts, so whatever you have to do for your body to do that."
Yeah,
Christian Bale is also very, very intense when it comes to body and, like, what he does
yeah,
for a movie. He went borderline anorexic for The Machinist, and, like, people were like, "You can't do that again." So he
yeah.
had to put on between The Machinist and Batman Begins, he put on 100 pounds in, like, a few weeks, of muscle, and then he ended up bulking up so much that they made him take some down, and he lost 30 more pounds in a week, or not
Oh
a week, but
wow.
in a short amount of time because he was
Yeah,
almost too bulky. So it's one of those things
right.
where he just goes to, and then when he did, American Hustle and Vice, he had like gained a lot of weight to where he was like chubby, and then he had to lose it again.
Yeah.
He's crazy, and it's, I mean, he's a great dedicated actor, but I think sometimes you just need to like rely on
Yeah.
a makeup team. But I don't know. So I like how though it was an approach of like, I want you to do these stunts, and like I want you to like kick ass rather than I want you to look this way, which I think is important.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Like, you should never be torturing yourself just because
No.
you're trying to
Yeah.
appease someone else's opinion of your body. I think
Yes.
that you should just get the physique that you feel you need for the role.
And the sexiness comes from the confidence and the delivery of the lines and just the overall presence and physicality more so than it does the image, even though she's also stunning. But it's also one of those things where it's like she's sexy as fuck because of the way she makes this character and creates this
Yeah.
character. And it's one of
Yeah.
those things where a lot of people are like, oh, they're objectifying Catwoman. But it's like, no, it's just she has a great grasp of this character to where it's just sexy by nature of what she's doing. It's not because they're
Mhm.
trying to make it. It's an added bonus, but it's not. They're not trying to
And,
objectify her. Is my point.
yeah. I mean, Anne Hathaway is just beautiful, first of all, and then
Yeah,
second of all,
call
like,
me, girl.
it's
If you, I know
totally
you're listening. I know you listen to DC
I know
Movie
you're
Mondays every week.
listening, and I know you're single, and I know you're looking for
Is
Dill,
she
so
single?
give him a call.
I
Oh,
didn't even
no,
know
I
she
have
was.
no idea.
I don't
I
know.
think she's married. I think she's
I know.
fully married and, like, has children.
Didn't
Um,
stop me before.
but okay. Cryptic drop, okay.
I'm kidding. Yeah, she's
But
married. It's Adam Schulman. Adam, you're probably a great guy. I'm gonna look you up.
honestly, like, as a woman
Oh,
in
he's a
this
good looking guy.
good for her. In this, like, as a woman who's, like, you know, just, you know, Selena Kyle being this, like, woman who has to, like, steal for what she, needs. Oh, so cute. And, kind of just, like, being this Robin Hood for
Uh
herself,
huh.
Um, she definitely like, the sexiness and the confidence is definitely, like, very purposeful and, like, very much a choice, like, coming from Anne Hathaway because it's just another way to, like, trick all these men around her that
Hmm.
think that she's gonna be, like, this harmless, like, damsel in distress. So
Yeah.
she's definitely just utilizing her assets and her attractiveness, and it's just, like, another way of, like, you know, getting what she wants in this movie, and it's at the end of the day, that makes her very smart. So, I think that there's a way to portray a sexy woman on screen and it's not through the lens of like gross men.
And I think Christian Bale has the most chemistry with her than any of the other women in this
Yes,
trilogy.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that all being said, I do think that Selena Kyle in general could have just been utilized a little bit better. I think that her character was very much for like a B plot that never really gets
Yeah.
too much attention. I think the main focus is obviously Bane and that like the city is going to explode. And I just feel like she kind of gets like lost in the shuffle a little bit until like right
Yeah.
at the end when she decides to stay and help him. And then they have their big romantic kiss, which like because we didn't, in my opinion, see enough of her, wasn't really that much of a payoff for me
Right.
because I was like, I didn't really like there weren't that many seeds getting planted in the beginning of this movie. So now that you guys are finally like getting together, it doesn't like feel like that much for me as a viewer. And then what I will say though is that I love a Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I love a Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
He's my favorite like supporting player in this. He's probably my favorite part of this film, I think.
And I was like, I was like just rocking with this movie. I was having a great time. Like towards the end, I was like, huh, I wonder if this like kind of makes him Robin. And then it turns out, Jill, funnily enough, they reveal him to be Robin. And she's like, "Oh, you should start using your real name. I really like it, Robin." And then he gets like the keys to the Batcave, and they like end on this big, "Ooh, Robin's like next in line to take over this like vigilante persona."
Yeah.
But as you said, I guess it just never came about.
Well, and I think it's also because like Christopher Nolan knew he was like, I'm stopping at 3. He didn't even want to make a third. His whole thing was like, he goes, how many third films are actually really good? Like he's like, everyone talks about sequels, but very rarely do they talk about the third film, and usually the third film is what sinks it. Like Godfather was the biggest reason, because the first 2 Godfathers both won the Oscar for Best Picture, and Godfather 3 is considered one of the worst sequels ever made, even though it was nominated for Best Picture, probably just because it was a Godfather. But I think he was kind of scarred by that and didn't want to make a third one. But then I think when Heath passed, he was like, this is a chance to like tell me that, you know, I want to finish the story out or something, because almost as like a peace of mind thing, because he didn't want the ending of the Dark Knight chapter to be focused around the sadness of Heath's passing, I think. And he planned on making Joker a big part of this, so he had to kind of scrap it all together and brought it more back to the Al Ghul stuff. But I thought it was very interesting, you know, what he was saying about the third film, because it is hard. And I think his whole thing was that he was like, you know what, we're not going to make another, so like, why not just like tease that for the audience and give the audience something to imagine in their heads as like where the story would have continued. Because I think it's fine for something to be set up even if we never get the payoff, as long as it's not like a come find out next time type deal. It's more so just like a little wink, like that's Robin, and because you know Robin, you know what that's probably going to lead to. And there's also the question of, and this is the big one, this is the big question I wanted to ask you, did he actually survive or not? Bruce, is he alive or not, or is Alfred imagining that at the end?
Alfred imagining. Well, Bill, I got nervous at the end because like we had gotten, Alfred was like, I always imagined you like settling down and like being with someone and like living your life. And so I thought that the last shot of the movie was going to be like at Michael Caine's face just like looking wistfully off into the distance at the cafe, and like an acknowledgement like, oh, there he is, like sitting at the cafe. And I thought, boom, that was going to be it. I didn't even think that we were going to get the shot of him and Selena sitting there. And I was about to be like, are they about to leave us on like the biggest cliffhanger in history that like Batman actually lived and now Alfred seeing him at the cafe? But yeah, I think, well, because don't we also find out at the end that like the autopilot actually did work on the plane and that he actually didn't have to sacrifice himself? I think that's like what happened at the end with like Morgan Freeman's character.
And it's to create the back and forth of, okay, so the autopilot works, so he could have ejected himself. Or he still went along with it anyway, or he ejected himself, but because he's jumping in the water with a big bat suit on and the radiation, he didn't survive it anyway, type deal.
Right.
And I don't think the movie would have outright said that if that was the case. Like, oh, the radiation, he got out, but the radiation killed him anyway,
Yeah.
I like to believe, just because of the way the second film ends, where it's like he literally takes the blame, like kind of takes the Harvey, all the baggage of the Harvey thing, and like literally lived long enough to see himself kind of become almost like a villainous Dark Knight type thing. I like to believe he did die because he wanted the end to be a heroic act type deal. I really do think so. And I think for
I like
Alfred,
it.
it's the peace of mind of like, but Bruce got his happy ending too because Bruce is happy with this. I don't know. I really don't know though. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
It's
what's
very
weird to me is that, like, if this is just like a cafe in Gotham, isn't someone gonna recognize him as
and I think
fucking
that's
Bruce
yeah.
Wayne?
You're right. You're right. Yeah,
And
because
aren't they
everyone
supposed
knows Bruce Wayne's dead, so it's like because he's
right?
got a gravestone. Yeah.
But, like, he's this well-known billionaire, so, like, he can't just, like, prance around Gotham and someone not notice him and realize that he's there, so maybe he really is dead.
Yeah.
I my little, like, hopeless romantic self thinks that because of what happened in Dark Knight, he deserves kind of a win and therefore, like, deserves his own little sweet little happy ending with him and Selena Kyle.
Mhm.
So I don't
Yeah.
know. I
It's like
I accept the ending either way. If it gets confirmed one day that it's
yeah.
canonical that he died or canonical that he didn't die, I'll be happy with either.
Well, and the great director David Lynch always said that once my movie is seen by one audience member, it's not my movie anymore. He says it's theirs
Mm,
because he's like he gets asked in interviews all the time, "What did this mean?" or "What did this mean?" or "What was the meaning behind this?" And he says, "You tell me." Because he's like, I just made it. It's your mind watching it. You're the one who's taking it in and has to absorb and engage with the art. I've already engaged with it in this whole process of making it, and
yeah.
he never reveals what his intention was. And I think it could be one of those things where if you ask Christopher Nolan, he'll just tell you, "You tell me," you know. And I think that's so cool. And I really like the ending. A lot of people are like, "Fuck this," but I'm like, oh, I love it. I think it's a really cool ending because also like this is as much Alfred's story as it is Bruce's because Alfred is the one person who's consistently with him every step of the way. He gets new sidekicks, he gets new love interests, but Alfred is the constant. So I think it's really cool that he gets the final moment, and like even if he is dead, Alfred's getting a happy ending out of it, and I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love Alfred.
Yeah. Love Alfred.
Mhm.
So sweet.
What a bro. What a bro.
So like I said, Dill, this one was my least favorite. It was the weakest in my opinion. So I did give it a 6.9 out of 10.
How dare you? 69?
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm gonna have nightmares tonight.
Oh God. Hey, Tom Hardy. Gotta love him. Hey, if there's one thing Tom Hardy is, it's risk taking. you know,
Yeah.
between that and the Revenant and the Venom films, and he's gonna be in
I
that new
wanted
Bike Riders film. So yeah,
I wanted to see him without the muzzle. I
yeah.
thought there was gonna be a muzzle reveal.
Well, because in the comics he's like this big, almost like juggernauty, like kind of big guy. So I like how they at least try to make him more human. Because he's the only
Yeah.
one I think in the comics, at least that I remember, who like actually like I don't think he kills Batman, but he like comes close. He breaks Batman's back in the comics. He like literally snaps it
Mm.
over his knee, and I think
Mm.
they do that here,
Ew.
but it's a little less. It's a little less
Yeah.
cartoonish. Like
He
you
was
know,
yeah. Yeah.
he fucks him up, and that's the thing is Joker and Scarecrow they never got Batman. This guy did, you know. So I think there's something
Yeah.
to say about it. But
Oh, that's another thing. Cillian Murphy, in case you were worried he wasn't in this one, he is. Don't worry.
yeah, he's there.
He's playing judge, jury, executioner in
Yeah.
this one.
Yeah, I love this trilogy so much. I gave this an 8 as well. I think the first and last, I'm like, they're great. I love them. 8. Whereas the
Mm.
centerpiece is the 10. It's like that's the main course, but the appetizer and dessert are also great. Like I'm gonna write the Yelp review. I'm gonna rave about the pork chop, but I'm also gonna mention how great the scallops and the chocolate cake were as well. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm happy, and this is because I have Easter Sunday food in my brain ready to go.
Okay.
Even though this is airing after Easter on the 1st, but you know Easter just happened. But
Yeah.
that's the Dark Knight trilogy. How do you rate the trilogy as a whole? How about that? Putting you on the
I
spot.
mean, mathematically, like, I could
You
find
just
the
average
average
them
right
together.
now.
That's funny.
Okay,
I can
wait.
tell you
So
too. 8 plus 8
7.9.
plus 10. Mine is an 8.6. 8.7. I'll round up.
Mine is a 7.9, so I'll round up to 8. I
All
give this
right.
trilogy an 8 out of 10,
This is a
and I
4-star
stand by
trilogy,
that.
man. Yeah, this is a great trilogy.
It was really, really solid, Dill. I think that, like, back in this time between, like, 2005, 2012, I think it was just such a golden age, especially for superhero movies. I don't think that superhero movies have been the same in the past decade, but definitely, like, this time, like, even what was going on in, like, the MCU, like, with Iron Man
Mm,
coming out, like, 2008 and, like, all the movies that happened in this specific time in that universe
right.
were great. But I
Yeah.
think this, like, trilogy especially was just it almost just, like, makes me a little sad about the shortcomings of, like, the superhero fandom have had in the last few years. But
especially
hopefully, with the
DC
addition
too.
of James Gunn, we're gonna be up on the up and up again.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what we talk about there. But yeah, this was so much fun, and we finally did it, which is so cool too, because it's like we've been wanting to do this for so long, and now with Christopher Nolan winning the Oscar, it's like we can now look back at his early works, which is crazy to say considering we were kids when these came out. He's now such an esteemed director. And what else have you seen of his? You've seen Inception, you said, right? Is that it? Have you seen The Prestige? That's a really good one. That's my favorite.
No, I haven't seen The Prestige. I think the only other one is Inception.
Oh, okay.
No, I didn't see Interstellar.
I would watch The Prestige because it's so cool. It's Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman, which is so cool. Yeah, and Michael Caine. So, and David Bowie's in it too. So that's fun. He plays Tesla, like the Tesla.
Nikolai.
Sure.
That's
cool, Kels. What do you have to plug down below before I tease our next episode?
You can find me on Instagram at Kelsey A. Kilpatrick. You can follow me on TikTok at Kelsey A. Kilp. And you can follow all my Letterboxd reviews. It's the same exact name as my TikTok at Kelsey A. Kilp if you'd like to.
Yeah, follow me on underscore. Follow me at underscore. No, follow me at Dylan underscore Randazzo, Dylan Randazzo 417 or Dill Pickle Movie Network. Next week, it's kind of an off week. Nothing new DC coming out. Christopher Nolan, we've done this. So Kelsey proposed a list of topics, and I went with the kind of more intriguing one, and that is we're going to look through BuzzFeed and Twitter and the Reddits and find the weirdest DC kinks. And we're going to talk about the weirdest fan kinks that people have towards DC. And I'm not talking just the weirdos who objectify Catwoman. I'm talking like King Shark and like Constantine. And, we're going to get a little weird next week. But hey, I mean, we got to keep it fun and fresh here on DC Movie Mondays because we've been running for quite a while. So we need to come up with new episode ideas, because we've been doing this for quite a while. So, Kels, can't wait to talk about weird DC kinks next week on DC Movie Mondays. And we'll see you guys next time. Let's play us out. Woo!
And here we go.